I was 17 when I first asked for a bank account. Not a credit card, not a loan, just a simple, basic checking account. My own name on the paper, my own signature on the dotted line. I didn't think it was a big ask, but my parents acted like I'd requested a helicopter. Or a criminal record. No, my mother said, closing the dishwasher door with a clang. You're not ready for that kind of responsibility. I stood in the kitchen, heart beating hard behind my ribs, pretending her words didn't sting. My father didn't even look up from his paper. He just grunted. Maybe when you're older, he said. Older? I was a year away from college. I'd been doing odd jobs since I was 14. Babysitting, dog walking, tutoring, reselling old textbooks on eBay. I knew how to count my money and save it. What I didn't know was why the people who raised me still saw me as incapable of even that much. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control, about independence. And something inside me knew this moment wasn't the end. It was just the opening move. That summer, while my classmates were going on beach trips and weekend drives, I was taking city buses to the library, to the community center, to job fairs. I lied about my age to get an unpaid internship at the downtown credit union, an hour commute each way, and showed up every morning in thrifted blazers and shoes that pinched my heels raw. They called me the kid. I was surrounded by adults in fitted suits, all of them talking about mortgages and interest rates and balance sheets. But I paid attention. I brought coffee. I learned. It was the first time I ever felt dangerous. My name is Alina Greaves, and this is the story of how I turned a locked vault into an open door, and how my parents' refusal became the very reason I outranked them before my 20th birthday. The internship ended in late August. By then, I'd memorized the layout of the branch, the names of all the district managers, and the daily schedule of the regional VP. I'd also learned something no one at home had ever taught me. That power isn't given, it's positioned. I returned to my final year of high school with a resume nobody could argue with. I applied for every paid banking assistant job I could find within bus range. When nothing opened up, I offered to volunteer again, but this time at a competing branch, 2 streets away from the one where I'd interned. I was playing the long game, and I didn't care if I had to play it quietly. Back at home, nothing had changed. My parents still gave me grocery money in cash and expected receipts. My mother inspected my purchases like she was auditing a corporation. You don't need that brand of conditioner, she said one night, plucking it out of the bag. We use store brand. I held her gaze. I paid for it with my own money. She raised an eyebrow. Your money? You mean the $10 I gave you? I didn't answer. I just took the bottle back and left the kitchen. Because I had paid for it. With the 20 I'd made tutoring algebra after school. But if she knew I was earning on the side, she'd shut that down too. It was like living under financial martial law. But the silence gave me cover, and sometimes, silence is all you need to build something explosive. I got my first break on a Tuesday. The teller at the branch where I volunteered called in sick, and the assistant manager, Nadia, a woman with sharp cheekbones and steel blue eyes, asked if I could help file some backlog. I said yes. She watched me as I sorted files faster than the temp they'd hired last week. She watched again the next day when I corrected a decimal error on an incoming wire transfer form. She didn't say anything. But I caught the look. 3 weeks later, she called me into her office. There's an entry-level opening, she said. Full-time. Pay's not glamorous, but it's real. You'd need to defer school a semester. I said yes before she finished the sentence. My parents barely noticed. They assumed I was still doing the unpaid volunteer hours. Still their little girl. Still incapable of managing anything more than a grocery list. It was the greatest illusion I ever maintained. Until the promotion. Banks are ecosystems. People assume it's about money, but it's not. It's about access. About who has it, who protects it, and who pretends they're doing both when they're really doing neither. I learned fast. I didn't have a degree, but I had Nadia. She mentored me, challenged me, pushed me to sit in on meetings where my title didn't belong. One of the senior associates, Martin, hated me. He called me kid, in a voice that curled with contempt, told me I was only here because I was cheap labor. But when Martin mishandled a wire transaction and nearly cost a client her home loan, it was me, quiet, unnoticed Alina, who found the error and flagged it before it hit the system. That moment didn't win me any friends, but it earned me something better. Visibility. A month after my 19th birthday, the branch manager was offered a regional role. The promotion opened a seat no one expected to be filled by someone like me. But Nadia submitted my name, quietly, without warning me. "I don't want you to be scared out of it," she said. "I want you to win it." I stared at her, numb. They'll never choose me. Then make them regret not doing it. I stayed up 3 nights preparing a branch development proposal. I interviewed twice. The panel was all men, none under 45. But when I walked out of that room, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't the kid anymore. Impact. The official call came at 7:18 p.m. on a Friday. I was sitting at my bus stop with a tuna sandwich and 2 missed calls from my mom. "Alina Greaves," said the voice on the other end. "We'd like to offer you the branch manager position, effective immediately." I forgot how to breathe. "Congratulations," they said. "You're the youngest branch manager in district history." I stood there for a full minute after the call ended. My legs didn't know whether to run, collapse, or dance. I chose to walk. Slowly, with purpose. That night, I went home to the same kitchen, the same parents, the same cold stares over dinner. "I'm going to need a car soon," I said calmly, cutting into my chicken. "It'll be hard to commute otherwise." My mother looked up sharply. "Commute where?" I met her gaze. "Work." My father narrowed his eyes. "You're still doing that volunteer thing?" I smiled. "No, I manage the branch now, full-time." Silence. My mother's fork clinked against her plate. My father stared. And for the first time in my life, I felt no fear, no need to explain, no desire to shrink. I had opened a vault they never thought I'd touch. And I wasn't done yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The sky was still ink black outside my window, a visible hush that matched the thunder in my chest. I dressed carefully, selecting my charcoal gray suit that had become my unofficial uniform. It was tailored enough to look professional but still affordable. After all, I was the youngest branch manager in district history, but I'd deferred that expensive college education to accept this role. My hands shook as I tied the knot of my tie. It wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. The weight of the previous evening's victory still fresh, a badge I couldn't remove. I locked my apartment door and stepped onto the quiet street. The city was stirring, streetlights humming, a stray newspaper rolling down the sidewalk, and the distant hum of engines starting up. I caught my reflection in a bus stop glass. My eyes were red-rimmed but bright, like someone who had seen something impossible and lived to tell the tale. At the bus stop, I pulled out my phone and glanced at the branch's schedule for the day. A new loan policy rolled out at 9 a.m., and I'd be leading the briefing. At 10, I had a sit-down with the regional VP to discuss staffing needs. And at noon, there was a community outreach event I'd organized. Milk and cookies for local families. Free financial planning sessions for parents. Community outreach was my secret weapon. Banks liked to say they served the communities around them, but so many of them treated it like a checkbox. They'd throw a game night once a year, or sponsor a charity gala. But I saw opportunity everywhere. I saw faces on the other side of each transaction. Mrs. Delgado, who struggled to save for her eldest's college. Mr. Patel, who wanted to open his own grocery store. And teenage students like me, who deserved a real chance at financial independence. The bus arrived, and I squeezed through the door, offering my seat to an elderly lady who nodded gratefully. I used that 15-minute ride to mentally rehearse my presentation. Words of encouragement rolled through my head. Be confident, be clear, be generous with information. That was the difference between a good manager and a great one. When I stepped off the bus and saw the branch's polished windows reflecting the morning sun, my phone vibrated. It was my mother. "Congratulations again," the text read. "We're proud of you." I stared at the message, feeling something shift. Pride? This from the same woman who refused to use the conditioner I bought myself. I typed back, "Thank you," and then stopped. Before I sent it, I hesitated, because part of me wondered if they even deserved my gratitude. But I pressed send. Inside the branch, the morning rush was already underway. The tellers were lined up, the coffee machine hissed, and customers milled around the waiting area. I took a deep breath and strode through the door, a smile on my face. "Good morning, everyone," I called out. The room went quiet, eyes turning toward me. "I'm Alina Greaves, your branch manager. Let's make today our best one yet." Nadia, my mentor, met my eyes from across the room. She gave me a tiny nod, her way of saying she believed in me. I implemented the new loan policy as planned, explaining the risk adjustments and criteria changes clearly. Some of the senior associates, Martin included, looked skeptical, but I didn't falter. I spoke with data, with empathy, and with authority. When the briefing ended, there was applause. Not loud, but genuine. Next, the meeting with the regional VP. I had prepared a staffing proposal, 2 additional tellers during peak hours, a part-time financial coach, and cross-training workshops for all employees. I walked into the sleek conference room, heart pounding. He looked up from his tablet and smiled. "Alina Greaves, I've heard good things." I nodded and began my pitch. I laid out charts showing customer wait times, trend lines of account openings, and projections for community outreach impact. I pointed out the local demographic shifts and how a modest staffing increase could boost our approval rate and retention. He listened quietly, sipping his coffee, and then leaned back. "Impressive. And your analysis on cross-training?" I explained how cross-trained employees could assist in multiple areas, reducing bottlenecks and improving customer satisfaction. By the time I finished, he was nodding along. "I'll approve the additional positions," he said, "but I want you to report back in 2 weeks with initial feedback." I thanked him and left the room feeling like I could move mountains. At noon, the branch lobby transformed into a community hub. Tables lined with pamphlets, cookie trays, chairs arranged for discussions. Families walked in, some wary, some excited. I greeted each one like they were old friends, offering them a seat and an open ear. One teenage girl approached me. She looked like I had at 17, hopeful and cautious. "Do you really think I can open my own account?" she asked. I knelt to meet her at eye level. "I know you can. Let's start the paperwork." She smiled, and I saw sunlight behind her eyes. The afternoon passed in a blur. By 5 p.m., every seat was filled. Forms signed, workshop sessions scheduled. My team looked tired but fulfilled. I gathered them in the break room. "Great work today," I said, handing out bottled water. "You showed what this branch can be, not a fortress but a launch pad." They cheered, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. But the day wasn't over. At 6:30 p.m., just as I was preparing to leave, the district VP called an emergency video conference. A new compliance regulation had been miscommunicated, and several branches were in risk. They needed someone to draft the correction memo and present it to headquarters. They wanted it done by morning. I volunteered. For the next 3 hours, I worked in the empty lobby, drafting, revising, and formatting a comprehensive briefing document. My computer battery winked at me around midnight, but I plugged in and kept going. At 2:17 a.m., I hit send. The conference call the next morning would begin at 8. I locked up the branch and walked home under the streetlights, feeling every ounce of fatigue mixed with exhilaration. When I arrived at my apartment, I collapsed on the couch and stared at the ceiling. My phone lit up. "Outstanding work," the email read. "Your memos saved us from potential fines. Headquarters thanks you." I let out a long breath and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I would return to another dawn, another set of challenges. But tonight, the world felt a little more like mine. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. I jolted awake to the shrill ring of my alarm. It was Saturday morning and most of my peers were sleeping in, but not me. Today, I was volunteering at a women's entrepreneurship fair, offering small business loans and workshops. The community center gym was already humming when I arrived. Rows of folding tables were neatly arranged, each one manned by vendors, coaches, and volunteers. Banners hung overhead reading, "Local Roots, Big Futures," and "Women Who Build the Economy." I hadn't even set down my bag before someone recognized me. "You're the bank manager, right, Greaves?" I turned to see a tall woman in a vivid blue pantsuit and braided hair streaked with silver. She had the poise of someone who'd run boardrooms, but her eyes sparkled with something warmer: hope. "I'm Violet Richards," she said, extending a hand. "I run a catering business just up the road. Your outreach team helped my niece last month. Taught her how to save for her first car." "Thank you." I shook her hand, humbled and a little startled. "I'm glad to hear it. If you ever need capital for expansion." She grinned. "That's exactly why I'm here." Quote. We both laughed. For the next 6 hours, I moved from table to table, answering questions, explaining microloan options, and connecting aspiring business owners with local mentors. I watched young mothers sketching logos on notepads, retired teachers calculating startup costs, and teenage girls dreaming of fashion boutiques and coding boot camps. It was beautiful, chaotic, raw, real. Around midday, a frazzled-looking woman approached me with a toddler on one hip and a folder of receipts in the other. "I don't have a degree," she said quickly, "but I've been selling handmade soaps online for a year. People love them. I've made almost 5,000. But I don't know how to get beyond that." I smiled. "You've already done the hardest part. Started. Let's take a look at your numbers." We sat down on the bleachers and combed through her expenses and sales. Within 20 minutes, I had her mapped into a basic business structure. She looked at me like I'd handed her the moon. "You should teach this," she whispered. "You make it make sense." I looked around the gym, at all the women hustling to carve out a space in a world that rarely handed them one. "Maybe I will," I said. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind buzzed with names, ideas, stories. I opened my laptop and typed up a short guide, "Banking Basics for Women Entrepreneurs." It was rough, but it was honest. I uploaded it to the branch website's resource section. By morning, it had over 400 downloads. The next week, I proposed a new program to headquarters: Financial Literacy Nights, led by women, for women. The pitch included budgeting tutorials, credit repair clinics, and low-interest business loan consultations. I called it Branching Forward. They approved it. I didn't tell my parents. They still asked vague questions like, "How's the office?" or "Still doing that money thing?" But they never asked for details. And I stopped offering them. Until one day, they showed up at the branch. It was a Thursday, mid-morning. My assistant buzzed in. "There's a couple here asking for you, Mr. and Mrs. Greaves." My stomach dropped. I walked into the lobby, every step stiff. There they were, my father in his golf windbreaker, my mother in her quilted coat, arms crossed tightly. "We want to open a savings account," she said briskly. "With you." I blinked. "Okay, I can help you with that." We sat down. I opened the software, took their IDs, began typing. The tension sat between us like an uninvited fourth party. My father cleared his throat. "We, saw the article." "What article?" "The one in the local paper, about your women's program, said you were changing the way banks serve the community." "Ah." My hands didn't stop moving. "It's a team effort." "You're the one running it," my mother said. Her voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't exactly soft either. I didn't answer. When the account was opened, my father hesitated before signing the final form. "We never expected this from you," he said. There it was. The confession. Not an apology, but a flicker of acknowledgement. I handed them their welcome packet and said, "I always did." They left soon after. And for the first time, I didn't wonder if I should have said more. Spring turned to summer. My program expanded into 2 other branches. I began giving workshops at local schools, helping teenagers understand loans, savings, credit cards. I was building something real, something that didn't just serve accounts, but transformed lives. One afternoon, while prepping for a panel talk at a regional conference, I received a strange email. Subject line, urgent proposal, meet ASAP. The sender was a name I vaguely recognized, Denise Bramble. She worked in strategic development at HQ. We scheduled a call. Alina, she said warmly when the screen connected. I've been following your work. The board is impressed. We want to talk about replicating your program nationally. I was stunned. You want to scale branching forward? Not just scale it, she said. We want you to lead the initiative, a new department, VP of Community Innovation. I swallowed, hard. I'm only 21. She smiled. Exactly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Travel, legal documentation, internal interviews. I wore out my shoes and slept in hotel rooms with viewless windows. But the offer came. A corner office, a new title, a budget, and a platform to teach every Alina out there that financial freedom wasn't a luxury, it was a right. I said yes. The day I packed up my branch office, Nadia showed up. I thought you might be too fancy to say goodbye, she teased. I hugged her tightly. I couldn't have done this without you. You did it anyway, she said, brushing something from my blazer. Go make noise. And I did. My first national workshop drew hundreds, my second drew thousands. I filmed a docuseries. I launched a scholarship fund. I trained women from Detroit to Dublin to design their own branches, their own futures. One morning I received a letter. It was handwritten, neat. Dear Alina, I used to think banking wasn't for people like me. I'm 48, a single mom, and I never once believed I could be financially stable. Then I watched your video. I opened my first account. I saved $1,000. I'm crying as I write this. Thank you. Lydia M. I read that letter 5 times. Then I framed it. Because no award, no paycheck, no newspaper headline ever compared to that. I had built a vault and left the door open. But something unexpected happened. An internal audit flagged a problem at my original branch, my old branch. Fraud. A teller had been manipulating loan approvals and funneling money through dummy accounts. It wasn't caught immediately because they'd mimicked my reporting style, my signature, my voice. I was summoned to HQ. Inside the sterile, glass-walled conference room sat 3 compliance officers. Alina, one began, we know you're not involved. But your name was used. We need your help to untangle it. My hands clenched under the table. They were right. I hadn't done anything wrong. But my work, my legacy, had been used to hurt people. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how trust could be so easily weaponized. Wondering if I should have done more, watched closer, guarded tighter. I thought about the girl who opened her first account, the woman who saved $1,000, the single moms, the students, the dreamers. I knew what I had to do. I returned to the branch myself, unannounced. I walked through the doors, just like the first time. Only this time, I wasn't a volunteer. I wasn't even a manager. I was the woman who had built this place into something better. And now, I had to protect it. The familiar sound of the lobby chime echoed off the branch's high ceilings as I stepped inside. It smelled like it always had: paper, toner, and faint hints of espresso from the break room machine. But everything else felt different. There were new faces behind the teller windows, some young, some disinterested. A man in a fraying jacket argued with a staffer about overdraft fees. A mother with a stroller waited awkwardly by the customer service desk, shifting her weight from foot to foot. It didn't take long to feel what had changed. The energy, the heartbeat. My branch had gone cold. The new manager was a man named Ross Calder. He'd come from a corporate finance background. Strict numbers, rigid systems. Ross didn't believe in community events. Said they were inefficient use of staff time. He hadn't continued branching forward. Hadn't attended a single outreach workshop. And under his watch, a low-level teller named Drew Venn had orchestrated a months-long fraud scheme right under everyone's noses. Ross greeted me with a clipped smile when I stepped into his office. Ms. Greaves, I assume this isn't a social visit. I sat down. No, I'm here to conduct an internal assessment. His jaw tightened. That's being handled by compliance. And I've been asked to advise. I found the very procedures being exploited. If my name was used to legitimize stolen money, I intend to be part of the solution. He leaned back slowly like he was trying to decide whether I was a threat or an inconvenience. Fine, but you're not to speak to any active employees without clearance. I smiled thinly. That would be true if I were external, but I've been granted branch access again. Temporarily. He blinked. I stood and handed him a printed memo from the regional director. His expression soured. Have a good morning, Mr. Calder. I started with the transaction logs. The system had changed slightly since I'd last sat in that corner office, but the layout was familiar enough. Drew Venn had processed over 70 suspicious loan applications using overlapping IP addresses and altered ID documentation. The red flags were almost lazy. But what chilled me was how closely he'd mimicked my phrasing in the approvals, my sentence structures, my note formatting. It was like reading a ghost of myself warped. The deeper I went, the more questions rose. These weren't solo actions. Drew had help. The system access levels were too clean, too consistent for just one person. At least one higher-level employee had cleared or overlooked the activity. I printed a list of all transactions Drew had handled, mapped against employee logins. 2 names showed up repeatedly. The first was Drew's own. The second was Martin Hayes. I sat back. Martin, the senior associate who'd never liked me. The one who'd called me the kid when I first started. He was still here? After all this time? I pushed away from the desk and stood. Ross tried to stop me in the hallway, but I brushed past him. I spotted Martin in the break room, pouring coffee. He looked up and smirked. Well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter. I didn't return the smile. Funny thing, I said, sliding a printed page across the counter. Your login was used to override a flagged transaction. Twice. He didn't blink, just took a slow sip of coffee. That a crime now? When it clears funds for a fake client, yes. He set the cup down. You're grasping. You've been gone for months. Things changed. And some things didn't. He stepped closer, voice low. You think you can come back and play sheriff? I don't play. He laughed under his breath. You always thought you were smarter than the rest of us. No, I said, matching his stare. I just proved it. I left the room without another word, but I'd rattled him. I could feel it. Back in Ross's office, I demanded Martin be suspended pending investigation. Ross resisted. I escalated it. By 3 p.m., compliance issued a formal directive. Martin was escorted out. That night, I sat in my apartment in silence. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I just stared at my wall of letters, thank you notes, printed emails, clippings from small-town newspapers praising the program I'd started. One mistake, one loophole, one toxic employee, and everything I'd built had been put in jeopardy. But that's when I understood something else. Building a legacy isn't about never falling. It's about how fast you stand back up. I called Denise Bramble. I want to return, temporarily. I want to rebuild this branch. She was quiet. Alina, you've grown beyond that. You don't need to go backward. I'm not going backward. I'm showing them how you clean house without burning it down. She sighed. 3 months, full control. I smiled. Done. The next morning, I walked back into the branch and called a team meeting. I stood where I used to stand, by the whiteboard in the staff lounge, and looked at the faces in front of me. I know trust has been broken, I said. And I won't lie, some of that is on us, on me, but we're going to rebuild it, together. They were skeptical. I could see it in the way they fidgeted, crossed arms, avoided eye contact. So I went further. I reinstated open door hours. I brought back anonymous suggestion slips. I scheduled one-on-ones with every employee. And I returned the community outreach board to its place in the lobby. Within a week, something shifted. Employees started speaking up. A junior teller named Felix admitted he'd noticed odd activity on Drew's login, but was afraid to say anything. I thanked him publicly in our next meeting. Confidence grew. We hosted a Saturday seminar on fraud awareness. Over 200 community members showed up. One of them was Lydia M., the woman from the letter. She stood up during the Q&A and said, "I trusted this branch because of one person, and now I trust it again because she came back." My voice cracked when I thanked her. Later that night, I went home and updated the homepage of Branching Forward's website. "Recovery is part of the journey," I wrote. "So is returning when it matters most." The next few weeks were a flurry of restructuring. I rebuilt the security protocols, hired 2 new compliance officers, enforced a double verification policy on all non-standard transactions. We rolled out customer education nights and financial repair clinics. Community satisfaction hit 97% within 6 weeks. HQ took notice. So did the press. But I wasn't doing it for headlines. I was doing it for the 17-year-old girl who once got laughed out of her own kitchen for asking about a checking account, and for the women still fighting to build futures no one else would believe in. One evening, as I locked up the branch alone, I saw a familiar figure waiting outside. My father. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his coat a little too big. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. We sat on the steps. "I didn't come to fight," he said, "or explain. I know I got it wrong. I was raised to believe that control meant love, that denying things to protect you was the same as providing." I stared ahead, let the silence stretch. "I saw the article," he said, "about the fraud. Thought maybe you'd quit, but you didn't." "No," I said quietly, "I didn't." He rubbed his hands together. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. That was never yours to give." He nodded slowly. "I know." We sat there until the streetlights came on. When he stood to leave, he turned back. "You think someday you could help me set up a savings plan? I never really learned how." I looked at him, this man who once controlled every dime I touched. "Yeah," I said, "I think I can." And just like that, a bridge began to form. By the end of my 3-month return, the branch was flourishing again. The board offered to let me stay indefinitely, but I declined. "I have work to do elsewhere," I said. I handed the reins to Felix, the junior teller who once stayed silent but now stood tall. He'd earned it. As I packed my things, I tucked a note inside the branch welcome binder. "To the next young woman who finds herself here, you belong. Speak up. Keep going." Then I stepped outside, back into the world I helped build. And it was waiting. The train station in Leeds was quiet that morning, unusually so for a weekday. My suitcase clicked behind me on the polished floor, echoing faintly as I passed the cafe where I'd once scribbled my first lecture notes on a napkin. That memory had teeth now. I was no longer a branch manager, not even just a VP. I was on my way to speak at the European Community Banking Summit, keynote speaker, front page billing. And the title printed beneath my name on the program? Director of National Inclusion Strategy. It didn't feel real until the moment my train glided out of the station and the landscape began to blur. Fields, towns, lives, all stitched together by rail and opportunity, or lack thereof. My seatmate was a young woman in a forest green hoodie, typing furiously on a laptop. We nodded at each other politely. Then I noticed the document she had open. It was my guide, the first one I ever wrote, Banking Basics for Women Entrepreneurs. "You found that online?" I asked gently. She blinked, startled. "Oh yeah, it's amazing. This woman wrote it ages ago. Her name's Alina Greaves." I laughed. "That's me." She froze, then looked at me again. "No way." "Way." We spent the rest of the ride talking. Her name was Margot, and she was 22. She'd just started her own online tutoring company and was terrified of handling the financial side. "But your guide made me feel like I could," she said. "You broke it down. You made it make sense." That line echoed. I'd heard it before, from countless women, from myself. By the time the train pulled into London, Margot had a list of resources, a follow-up Zoom with one of my advisors, and a personal invitation to our next women's workshop. "You're incredible," she said, eyes shining. I smiled. "So are you. Now go build something no one expects." That became my new motto. The summit was hosted at a grand hotel near Westminster. Gold trim, marble columns, rows of tables stacked with lanyards, and branded water bottles. I walked into the main auditorium, heart pounding. Behind the podium stood a 10-foot banner with my name on it. The crowd was packed. Journalists, CEOs, nonprofit leaders, students. When the lights dimmed and my name was called, I stepped forward into a spotlight that didn't feel borrowed anymore. I talked about the myths of financial literacy, the myth that it's boring, that it's elitist, that it's too complicated for women, or the working class, or immigrants. I told the story of Lydia M. of Margot, of myself. And when I finished, the applause felt like a wave that lifted me off the stage. Afterward, a woman in a navy blazer approached me. "We're from the International Financial Equity Council. Would you consider joining our advisory panel?" I paused only a second, then said yes. I went back to my hotel room that night, exhausted but elated. I opened my laptop and checked our online dashboard. The new initiative we'd launched, First Funds, a no-fee savings program for single parents, had already enrolled 8,000 users in its first week. That's when my assistant messaged me. "Emergency board call, 9 a.m. your time, top priority." My stomach turned. The next morning, the call began with muted greetings and tight smiles. Then Denise spoke. "We've had a data breach." The room fell silent. A server tied to our small business loan processing platform was compromised. No funds stolen, but client data, including personal financial documents, was exposed. I closed my eyes. How bad? 5,000 records, mostly women, mostly from our branching forward pilot cities. That hit like a punch. Denise continued. "We're containing it, but Alina, we need you to face this, publicly. You're the face of this initiative." I didn't hesitate. "Give me everything. I'll write the statement myself." That day, I canceled the rest of my summit schedule. I sat at a desk overlooking the Thames, typing out a letter that would be read by thousands. I didn't sugarcoat it. "We failed to protect your information. That failure is mine to carry. But I promise you this, we will not hide. We will fix it, learn from it, and return stronger." I hit send. Then I got on another train. Back to the branch in Manchester, where the breach originated. I met with every affected customer face to face. I sat in cafeterias and church basements and daycare centers. I answered every question, signed every reimbursement, took every angry word like a bruise I deserved. And by the end of that week, something happened. They forgave us. Because we showed up, we took responsibility. We didn't vanish behind glass towers. One woman handed me a tissue after a long meeting and said, "If only all bankers were like you." I didn't cry until I got back to my hotel room. A month later, I was nominated for the National Social Impact Medal. At the ceremony, the presenter paused before handing me the medal. "She taught us that access is not a gift," he said. "It's a right, and she made it possible for thousands." The applause thundered, cameras flashed, but all I could think about was the first time I'd asked for a bank account. How far that girl had come. That night, I got a text from my mother. "Saw you on the news. Your father and I watched the whole thing. We're proud and sorry." It was short, but it was everything. I replied simply, "Thank you," and let it be enough. The next morning, I returned to headquarters to present a new plan. A bank for women. Not just a program, not a branch within a branch. A full digital institution. Built by women, staffed by women. Designed for women. Transparent, accessible, secure. We'd call it Haven. My boardroom pitch was detailed, passionate, data-rich. But what won them over was one slide. A photograph of a 17-year-old girl standing outside a locked bank door, holding a savings passbook she never got to use. "This is where it starts," I said. "This is where we change the story." They approved phase 1 that same day. I walked out of the boardroom, heart racing, knowing everything was about to change again. And then I heard my name, a voice I hadn't heard in years. Alina? I turned. It was Nadia, my old mentor, my first real ally. She smiled. I thought it was you. I'm with the London office now. I hugged her like a lifeline. You're the reason I'm here, I whispered. She pulled back, eyes shining. No, Alina, you're the reason we're all here. We sat in the lobby cafe for an hour catching up. She told me about her 2 daughters, about her new training academy. I told her about Haven. You'll need instructors, she said. Let me build your curriculum. And just like that, she was part of it too. A year later, Haven launched in beta. 10,000 users in the first week. By month 2, it became the fastest growing financial app for women in the UK. And in month 3, we expanded to Ireland and Canada. Margot joined our advisory board. Lydia became our community ambassador. And me? I signed my name to something no one had thought possible. Not just as a banker, but as someone who had once been told, flatly, that she wasn't ready for her own account. Someone who now led an institution that helped others say, yes, I am. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. I stood on the Haven campus in Manchester. Yes, a campus now, watching the first cohort of women step out of the training center. Some in suits, some in jeans, all with lanyards bearing the Haven seal. They laughed, hugged, clutched their certificates like they were gold. I felt someone step up beside me. It was Felix. Branching Forward 2.0, he said, smiling. I nodded. Better, stronger. And then my phone buzzed. It was a notification. Haven had just surpassed 1 million users. I exhaled, looked up at the sky, and whispered to the girl I used to be, they locked you out, but you built your own key. The morning light poured through the tall windows of Haven's new flagship center in Edinburgh. The stone facade had once been a neglected government building. Now, with its arched glass doors, green rooftop, and accessible open interior, it looked reborn, like it finally had something to say. I arrived early. The team hadn't yet filtered in, and the atrium was quiet, just the soft hum of the lights and the scent of new furniture. The first floor had a walk-in financial triage station. Anyone, anytime could come in without an appointment. No jargon, no pressure. Upstairs were co-working spaces, on-site childcare, a credit repair clinic, and a training room for Haven Fellows, the next generation of financial educators. At the heart of the atrium was a bronze plaque. I ran my fingers along its edge as I passed it. It read, "To the ones who were told they couldn't, welcome." I headed to the top floor, where the internal town hall would begin in 20 minutes. We were finalizing our first global fellowship expansion. 14 countries had submitted applications to pilot Haven hubs, ranging from Nairobi and New Delhi to rural Quebec and southern Spain. But one country hadn't applied. The United States. And it wasn't because they weren't interested. It was because they didn't believe Haven would survive the jump. Too values-driven, one analyst had said, not competitive in the American market, not scalable. But I disagreed, and I planned to prove them wrong. I took the stage with my clicker in hand. The team settled into their seats. Most were women. Many were former clients, now educators or engineers. All were fiercely loyal. We're not just going to cross the ocean, I began. We're going to build a lighthouse. The slide behind me shifted to a mock-up of Haven's U.S. pilot program. Haven's Southside, I said. Chicago. Ground zero for the most ambitious branch we've ever built. Whispers rippled through the room. Why Chicago? Someone called out. I smiled. Because that's where women are losing homes due to financial scams. That's where single mothers are juggling 3 jobs and still can't open a checking account without monthly fees. That's where payday lenders outnumber banks 5-1. And because it's time. They applauded. But applause wasn't enough. We needed partners, community leaders, activists, legal advisors. So I flew there. To the South Side. To the church basements and high school gyms. To the apartment complexes where hope was an unfamiliar word. The first time I walked into the local women's shelter, I was met with suspicion. These women had been promised a lot and let down even more. But I told them my story. About how I wasn't allowed a bank account. How I fought to change that. How they could fight too. When I finished, a young woman named Raquel stood up. She wore a t-shirt 2 sizes too big and had her baby swaddled against her chest. "If I teach you what I know," I said to her, "will you teach the others?" She didn't answer right away. Then finally, she nodded. That was the spark. Within a month, we had a rented storefront. Within 2, a waiting list. Within 3, press. But not everyone was thrilled. A local lender with a check-cashing chain sent us a cease and desist, claimed our educational flyers were defamatory. I met with their lawyer myself. "You're scared," I said calmly, "because we're telling the truth." "We'll sue," he snapped. I stood. "Then sue us. We'll win. And every mother you've overcharged will see it on the news." He backed down. By the 4th month, we were serving 300 clients a week. Raquel was now lead instructor. I gave her a key to the building one afternoon. She looked at it like it was made of gold. "My first key," she whispered. "No," I said, "just the first one they couldn't take away." That night, I cried in my hotel room again. Not from stress. From awe. Then came the invitation. The U.S. Treasury. A round table on inclusive banking practices. And they wanted Haven represented. Denise called me from HQ. "You're the one, Alina. Go." The event was formal. Cold air conditioning, nameplates, bulletproof glass. I stood before senators, regulators, and banking execs. And I told them, profit matters, but access is priceless. You can't build an economy if half your people are locked out. I showed them numbers. Then stories. One senator, a woman in a red blazer, raised her hand. "Do you think it's really possible to replicate what you did in these communities?" I looked her dead in the eyes. "I don't think. I know." By the time I sat down, 3 officials had slipped me their cards. That's when it became clear. Haven US wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. And I would lead it. Back in the UK, I faced a new dilemma. Stepping away from day-to-day Haven operations in Europe would be hard, but I couldn't lead 2 continents at once. I needed a successor. So I called Nadia. She flew in the next day. We met on the rooftop garden of the original Manchester branch, the one where it had all started. "You've built an empire," she said softly, "and now I need someone to protect it." She stared at me. "You sure?" I nodded. "You taught me how to lead. Now it's your turn." She accepted. I held a staff ceremony 2 weeks later. We didn't wear suits. We wore colors. We danced. We lit sparklers on the roof. Then I handed her the ceremonial key and boarded a flight to Chicago. The sun hit different in Chicago. Everything here was louder, faster. People moved with purpose, even when they didn't know where they were going. Cabs honked like punctuation. And the skyline, soaring glass and steel, looked like it dared you to dream taller. I stepped out of O'Hare with 1 rolling suitcase and a duffel. I didn't need much. Haven covered the apartment, 2 blocks from the Southside pilot branch, and the building still smelled like fresh paint. Raquel met me at the doors the next morning. "You really moved here," she said, folding her arms, "not just checking in." "I don't check in," I said. "I show up." She smiled. "Then let's get to it." The Southside branch was still in scaffolding when I arrived. Not physically, but spiritually. The walls were painted, the rooms furnished, but the soul of the place, the why, wasn't there yet. That was my job. We held a staff orientation that week, in the open plan community space. I stood in front of a group of 15, banking interns, single moms, 1 retired school principal, a veteran, and a young man named Miles, who used to run a cash-only mechanic shop out of his uncle's garage. "I'm not here to tell you how to run numbers," I said. "I'm here to teach you how to make them count." Then I told them about Haven's origin, about the locked door, about my parents, about the little wins and the cracks in the system we kept patching with hope. And when I finished, nobody applauded. They just stood, all of them, and started setting up chairs. That was the culture we built. In the first month, we launched 2 programs. Munch Mama Sire Restart, a credit recovery system paired with mentorship and budgeting. Their 50 solid start for first-generation account holders, with 0 overdraft risk and 24/7 support. We also set up food pantries, phone booths for job interviews, and a rotating schedule of financial educators, most of whom had once been students themselves. Raquel taught the flagship course every Tuesday night. She wore a blazer over her usual hoodie, and by the end of her first lecture, 3 women in the back row were crying. Not because she was sentimental, but because she was state them, and she knew what it meant to get a second chance. That week, I got a call from City Hall. "The mayor wants to meet you," the assistant said. I agreed, knowing it could be politics, but hoping it would be partnership. We met in a quiet conference room lined with old portraits. The mayor, Lisa Martin, was younger than I expected, and sharper. "I don't trust most private financial institutions," she said bluntly, "but I've been watching you. Then you know we don't act like one." She poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs. "You've got the city buzzing, that's rare, but buzz fades, results stick." I opened my briefcase and slid her a report. 200 new accounts in 6 weeks, 40 small business startups launched, 15 women placed into stable housing, and 0 overdraft penalties. She read it, then set it down. "You're not running a bank," she said. "You're building a movement." I smiled. "Movements move things, that's the point." She extended her hand. "I'll back you, but if you ever go corporate on me." "You can fire me publicly," I finished. We shook hands. Back. Week 9, we got press. A local outlet ran a feature called "The Woman Who Brought Trust to the South Side." It had a full-page photo of Raquel holding a baby in one arm and a ledger in the other. My name was in the last paragraph. That was exactly how I wanted it. But it also meant we were on someone else's radar. I got an email from a man named Franklin Marsh, CEO of Westcore Finance, regional lender, the kind that targeted low-income neighborhoods with high-interest bait loans and payday advances. He requested a meeting. I refused. He sent a letter threatening legal action against our unfair market practices. I replied with a 28-page breakdown of how his own interest rates violated state lending laws. Then he sent people. A man in a leather coat showed up outside Haven Southside and handed out flyers to our clients, claiming we were part of a, quote, foreign-funded surveillance program. We called the police. He vanished. Then came the break-in. It happened after hours. Nobody was hurt. But someone smashed the server cabinet and poured something sticky over the router boards. Possibly honey. Childish, but effective. We were offline for 48 hours. I spent those 2 days sleeping in the break room, working with our security engineer to manually reconfigure the backup drives. We lost some files, but not much. We recovered. But it was a warning, and it was personal. I called Denise that night. This is what they do when they know they're losing. She didn't hesitate. "I'll triple your security budget, whatever you need." But I didn't just want guards. I wanted a spotlight. So we called a press conference. Standing on the front steps of Haven Southside, I faced a line of microphones. "Someone thinks they can scare us into silence," I said. "That hasn't worked before, and it won't work now. We are here, we are open, and we are not backing down." The clip went viral. CNN picked it up, BBC reposted it. Suddenly everyone had an opinion. And more importantly, everyone had a question. What is Haven? So I told them. In interviews, on podcasts, in lectures, in every corner I could reach. Haven is what happens when women stop asking for access and start designing it. Within a month, we received over 100 partnership requests from churches, schools, neighborhood watch groups. Even from a group of high school students who wanted to volunteer on weekends. And then, one morning, the unexpected happened. A letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a check for $1 million, along with a note. From someone who used to think money was power, you taught me that trust is. We framed it. And we used it to open 3 more Haven pilot locations across the city. That summer, we launched Haven Mobile, an outreach van with banking tools, Wi-Fi, and staff who traveled to communities that couldn't come to us. Raquel drove it herself the first weekend. When she returned, sunburned and grinning, she said, "You should see what we started." One woman came out in her slippers with 5 kids just to open a savings account. I hugged her and knew we were only just beginning. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the Secretary of the Treasury called. I was in the middle of editing our updated First Funds onboarding brochure when my assistant Leah burst into the conference room. "Alina," she said breathlessly, "Washington, line 1. I blinked. "Washington who?" She just pointed at the phone. I picked it up, pressed the blinking light. "This is Alina Greaves." The voice on the other end was calm, composed, and carried that uniquely political tone. Measured, practiced, polished, but I could still detect a trace of urgency beneath it. "Ms. Greaves, this is Secretary Holland. I've been following Haven's work. You're doing something remarkable and disruptive." I didn't respond right away. He continued, "We have a financial inclusion task force being assembled for Q3. It's been greenlit by the president. I want you on it. Actually, if I'm being honest, I want you to help shape it." I exhaled slowly. "I'm honored, and I accept." I hung up, stunned. This wasn't just about a single program anymore. We were talking about national policy, structural reform, systems that had existed since before I was born. The girl who was once denied a bank account had just been asked to help reimagine banking for an entire country. Leah stared at me. "Well," I whispered, "we just got invited to the White House." She screamed. 3 weeks later, I was standing under the portico, staring at a set of double doors that felt more like myth than material. I wore a navy suit, no jewelry, hair in a tight bun. Power wasn't in how much you wore, it was in how you stood. Inside the Roosevelt Room, the table was packed. Representatives from 6 major banks, 3 regulators, a handful of senators. And me. I could feel their eyes, some curious, some skeptical, a few outright dismissive. But I had learned something long ago. Confidence doesn't come from being the loudest. It comes from knowing your story is real. Secretary Holland began the meeting. "We are here to talk about trust and the future of financial access. Ms. Greaves, the floor is yours." I stood. "I want to tell you about Haven," I said. "But more than that, I want to tell you about the women we failed for decades. The ones who were told banking wasn't for them, who were punished for being poor, who were preyed upon instead of protected, who were silenced by fees, by forms, by systems designed to exclude." I walked them through case studies. Margot, Lydia, Raquel. Then I presented a national model, one we'd been secretly building behind the scenes. Haven United, I said. A partnership platform that helps existing banks adopt our methods without overhauling their structure. Think of it like open-source infrastructure for inclusion. They stared, some impressed, some overwhelmed. One senator leaned forward. "And you really believe they'll go for it?" "I don't believe it," I said. "I've seen it. I've lived it." That got their attention. When I finished, the room applauded, soft at first, then stronger. After the meeting, Secretary Holland shook my hand. "We're going to do this," he said. "Together." The following months were a frenzy. We built a pilot program with 3 partner banks, launched it in Detroit, El Paso, and Baltimore, embedded our educators into their branches, introduced our zero overdraft framework. The impact was immediate. Approval ratings spiked, customer retention doubled, and complaints about inaccessibility dropped by 70%. Press dubbed it the Haven effect. Then came the blowback. Westcor Finance filed a formal complaint with the Federal Reserve, claiming we were creating an unfair monopoly on ethical branding. It was absurd, but serious. I was called to testify, not just in the media, before Congress. The hearing room was packed. I wore my grandmother's scarf beneath my blazer, her favorite turquoise one, a reminder that I didn't walk in alone. The committee chair looked over his glasses. Ms. Greaves, you are aware this body has the power to recommend federal restrictions on your operations. Yes, sir. And you're still expanding Haven? Yes, sir. He raised an eyebrow. Why? I leaned forward. Because the people we serve have waited long enough. Because if doing the right thing makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time you got uncomfortable. The room went silent. Then the questions started. I held my ground. By the time I walked out, 3 members had told me privately they'd vote in our favor. A week later, the complaint was dismissed. I returned to Chicago that weekend exhausted, but not defeated. Raquel greeted me with an envelope. A letter came, she said. Handwritten. No return address again. I opened it. Inside was another check. $2 million. And a note. Still learning. Still changing. Still grateful. Whoever it was, they were funding our next city. We chose Atlanta. Why? Because they told us not to. Because someone there had said, it's too competitive. So we competed. Within 4 months, Haven Atlanta became the largest branch yet. We hired 30 staff, all from within 5 miles of the site, started a quarterly market day for women-owned businesses, set up an in-house domestic violence liaison, and launched a mobile clinic in partnership with a local health nonprofit. But just as we reached new heights, a storm hit. A whistleblower. An internal report claimed that a Haven manager in Detroit had been misreporting outreach numbers to hit grant targets. My heart dropped when I read it. I took the first flight out. Detroit was cold that week, brutally so. The wind whipped off the river with the bite of February. I didn't announce my visit. I walked in like any client, observed, asked questions, then requested the staff meeting room. They gathered, 20 of them. I know someone made a mistake, I said, but I need to know if it was one person or all of us. There was silence, then a voice. It was just Darren, said a woman near the back. He said the grants would be pulled if the numbers dropped. I nodded, thank you. We terminated Darren that day, with respect, but with finality. Then I stayed. For a week. Working side by side with the team, rebuilding reports, meeting clients, reinforcing the culture. By Friday, things felt right again. Sometimes leadership means firing someone. Sometimes it means showing up with coffee at 6 a.m. just to say, we're still here. As I boarded my flight back, I thought about everything. The locked account. The first internship. Nadia. Raquel. Congress. The anonymous donor. I looked out the window as the plane lifted. We had built something no one expected. And we were nowhere near done. The email came at 2:43 a.m. I was up, sitting cross-legged on my hotel bed in D.C., crunching through a draft proposal for a new youth savings program when the notification pinged. Subject line, urgent, G7 Side Summit invitation. I stared at it. The sender was real. The seal was real. It was an invitation to speak at the upcoming G7 Economic Inclusion Side Summit in Berlin. I reread it twice, then stood and paced. This wasn't just a panel, it was a table where the global conversation happened, and now they wanted me to join. I clicked accept. The weeks leading up to Berlin were chaos. Haven Atlanta had launched its third microfund. Our mobile app, still in beta, was clocking 300,000 active users, and Raquel had just been offered a book deal. We celebrated quietly, coffee, banana bread, a sticky note from me that read, "From branch to bookshelf." She laughed. "You really never stop writing on Post-its?" "Never," I said. In the background, our digital dashboard lit up with user milestones. The number of women with over $1,000 saved in Haven accounts had passed 500,000. And yet I couldn't shake the weight of Berlin. I'd spoken to bankers, presidents, senators. But this was something else. So I called Nadia. "You'll do fine," she said. "You've got their attention. Now make sure they don't forget why." Berlin was gray and wide, a city with both scars and skyscrapers. The summit venue looked like a steel cathedral, glass panels, long staircases, banners fluttering in German and English. My name was on the roster next to central bankers and world leaders. They gave me 9 minutes. That was enough. When it was my turn, I stood in front of 400 people, some in suits worth more than my first year's salary, and took a breath. I was 17 the first time I was told I wasn't ready for a bank account, I began. And then I told them everything. From the branch in Manchester to Haven, Chicago. From Lydia to Raquel. From locked doors to digital keys. When I finished, no one clapped right away. Then someone stood. Then another. Then the entire room. I didn't cry, but I thought about that 17-year-old girl. How she would have smiled. Back in the States, a new challenge awaited. A chain of credit unions in the Midwest reached out with a proposal. They wanted to partner. Merge, actually. Keep their structure but adopt our systems. It would triple our footprint overnight. But it came with risk. Board control, voting seats, conflicting values. I flew to St. Paul, Minnesota to meet with their CEO, a quiet man named Vincent Cho who wore thick glasses and ran his operation like a tight ship. "I admire what you've built," he said, "but culture is hard to scale." I nodded, which is why we scale values, not just systems. We sat in silence a long moment. Then he said, "Let's do it, but keep your name, your staff, your soul." We signed the merger and called it Haven Roots. With growth came pressure. Headquarters needed doubling. We leased a campus in Baltimore, 4 buildings, glass and red brick, near the harbor. Staff moved in over 2 months, and our first ever Haven Institute for Financial Empowerment opened on site. We brought in fellows from Lagos, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo. We trained, listened, learned. And slowly, we were becoming more than an initiative. We were becoming an ecosystem. Then came the backlash. A major news outlet ran a story, "Is Haven too good to be true?" They cited anonymous sources, hinted at data manipulation, implied we were just another rebranded fintech startup with good PR. It stung. Not because it was true, but because it would make people who needed us hesitate. I called a staff-wide video conference that night. "Don't let the noise drown the truth," I said. "We know who we are, and so do our clients. Just keep serving. That's our answer." The next day, Raquel posted a video. She sat on a folding chair outside Haven Southside with her daughter on her lap. She said, "They called us a story, but this isn't fiction. This is my life, and Haven changed it." It hit 1 million views in 36 hours. The outlet retracted part of the story. We didn't gloat. We just kept going. One morning, I walked into a middle school gym in Milwaukee to speak at a youth financial literacy day. A girl in the front row raised her hand. "Did you ever almost quit?" I paused. "Every month," I said honestly. But then someone walks in and says, "Thank you." And I remember why I started. She nodded like she understood. Later, she handed me a note. "I'm going to build something too." I pinned it to my office wall, right beside Lydia's letter. By the end of that year, Haven was in 11 countries. We had 500,000 app users, 80 in-person branches, and our own conference. We called it Havening. 10,000 attendees came. Nadia gave the opening speech. Raquel launched her book from the main stage. Margot announced the launch of Haven's AI-driven budgeting tool. And I sat in the back row for most of it, watching, smiling, letting them shine. Because leadership isn't about being seen. It's about lighting the path and stepping aside when others are ready to walk it. But just when I thought the world had caught up, a message arrived. Encrypted, direct from an international human rights group. A request. Urgent. Could we help build a covert financial network for women in a country where banks were no longer safe? I read it once. Then again. And I knew. We had a new mountain to climb. The email had only 3 lines. Encrypted channel verified, women's banking access dismantled and redacted, requesting urgent Haven intervention, silent support preferred, risk level elevated. I stared at it for a long time, then forwarded it to Denise, Raquel, Nadia, and 2 people from our global legal team. The reply came back almost immediately. Denise, we move only if you lead it. Nadia, tell me when to pack. Raquel, we don't just build banks, we build lifelines. I'm in. Within 72 hours, we had a secure conference set up with the organization's director. I can't name the country. But the facts were clear. Banks had been shuttered or state-absorbed. Women's accounts were frozen or emptied. Identification documentation was being rescinded for security reasons. Withdrawal from financial networks was a tactic, a way to force silence. But people still trade, said the director, a woman with sharp eyes and a firm voice. There's an underground flow, cash, favors, coded ledgers. What they need is structure, safety, tools, and above all, dignity. Dignity. That word landed like a stone. We built Haven to be inclusive. But now we were being asked to be insurgent. We activated the Haven Covert Team, a small group inside our org, cybersecurity pros, civic engineers, and 2 economists with experience in gray market systems. We'd never launched a full covert deployment, but we'd trained for it. We codenamed the operation Side Project Ember. We couldn't use our app. We couldn't use our name. So we built an entirely offline system, disguised as a family budgeting ledger. Paper-based, waterproof, unassuming. It used a point exchange algorithm that mimicked currency, tracked savings, and enabled group banking through peer verification circles. Then we trained 3 operatives from inside the requesting country, trusted women with existing underground education networks. They were known locally as * the Midnights. In the dead of night, they distributed ledgers, taught each woman how to use them, linked groups together in clusters of 5. Each cluster had a code. Each code had a float value. And slowly, a shadow network of economic resistance began to form. We monitored from afar through encrypted check-ins, burner phones, and USB exchanges at crowded markets. The impact came fast. Within 2 months, over 2,000 women had access to stored funds, pooled, tracked, and distributed without a single digital footprint. One cluster started a barter exchange using soap and grain, another opened a mobile seamstress co-op, a third funded a makeshift clinic with proceeds from informal tutoring. All off-grid. All Haven-born. All quiet. One night I received a video. A flickering phone recording, a woman in a dimly lit room holding up a paper ledger. "My name is Hannah," she said. "This book is the only reason I still have medicine for my son, thank you. We don't say your name here, but we know who you are." I sat in silence for almost an hour. Then I stood, went to my office wall, and pinned her image beside Lydia, Margot, and the Milwaukee girl. The wall was nearly full now, but my heart had never felt more empty and full at once. While Project Ember grew, the rest of Haven didn't stop. Haven LA opened its doors with a community day that drew 5,000 people. Our fintech hub in Dublin launched a new feature that used behavioral nudging to help users hit savings goals. And Raquel's book hit the NYT bestseller list. But with success came scrutiny. A rival startup, EquitySphere, began marketing themselves as the real solution, claiming we were too idealistic, too activist, too feminine. I knew better than to take the bait. But then one of their founders went on live television and said, "Let's be honest, Haven isn't scalable. It's a charity in a blazer." I didn't react publicly, but we issued one statement. We don't wear blazers, we wear armor. The next week, Haven was featured on the cover of Time. Title: The financial revolution led by women. Photo. Me, Nadia, Raquel, and 5 Haven clients from different countries standing in front of the original Manchester branch. In my hand, one of the Project Ember ledgers. Subtle, intentional, truth. Then came the awards. UN Human Impact Citation. EU Social Infrastructure Medal. Nobel Peace Prize shortlist. I kept the medals, but I sent the framed nomination to my parents. A week later, my mother called. She cried. She said she'd read every article, that she'd been wrong, that they'd both been wrong, that they didn't know how to parent someone who outgrew their world so fast. I listened. Then I said, "You don't have to catch up. Just walk beside me now." She cried harder. And then said, "We opened a joint account, and I let your father pick the floral design on the checks. So that's our compromise." I laughed and forgave her. As our team expanded globally, we built Haven Commons, a new hybrid center for policy, innovation, and recovery support. Located in Boston, Commons became the brain of our movement. Think tank by day, shelter by night, lecture hall, innovation lab, and tucked inside it, the thing I'd once been denied. My very own branch. Alina Greaves Branch. When I saw the sign, I cried. Not because I needed the name, but because someone else might see it and think, maybe I can do this too. And they'd be right. In our 5th year, we launched Havenverse, a secure blockchain-based system that let women in politically hostile regions protect assets in ways even governments couldn't trace. Project Ember integrated into Havenverse. It was the final circle. One ledger. One app. One invisible bridge between courage and freedom. Hannah sent another video. This time, she stood with 5 other women, each holding their now worn ledgers. Behind them, chalk on a wall. "You didn't give us permission. You gave us power." Asterisk. I watched it in my office, then walked to the door. Outside, Margot was waiting. "We hit 10 million users today," she said. I nodded, then whispered, "And we just gave 6 more women their lives back." She didn't reply. She just hugged me. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe. We'd done something irreversible. Something immortal. In the 6th year of Haven, we began building cities. Not in the literal sense, not roads or sewers or rooftops, but economic cities. Networks of trust so dense and so alive that they moved like municipalities of purpose. We called them financial commons zones asterisk, communities where Haven had reached a saturation point, not just through clients, but through culture. In Detroit, you could walk 3 blocks without touching a traditional bank and still get your loan, pay your bills, fund your side hustle, and attend a budgeting seminar while your child played in a supervised nook. In Bogota, single mothers formed Haven circles that saved together and co-owned market stalls. In Manila, Haven's digital branch ran out of an open-air coffee kiosk, and its volunteer-staffed app booth trained nearly 12,000 users in 6 months. We had built the bones of something ancient and urgent, a trust economy. The next logical step was education. So we announced Haven Scholars Asterisk, a full-ride fellowship for first-generation college students pursuing careers in economic justice, fintech ethics, or social entrepreneurship. Within 48 hours, we had over 7,000 applications. The first round of 100 recipients was announced on International Women's Day. I flew to Nairobi to surprise one of them, Salima, 19, whose mother had once paid for school books by bartering handmade soap through a Project Ember ledger. Salima stood frozen when I appeared in her community center with the acceptance letter and a Haven pin. Then she cried. "I thought I'd have to leave my dreams behind," she whispered. "You didn't leave them," I said. "You lit them." Back in Boston, we launched a 5-year Haven Vision Plan, expand to 50 countries, reach 50 million users, and integrate Haven curriculum into 10,000 schools. But vision doesn't come without enemies. EquitySphere rebranded, twice, then attempted to poach our tech leads. We didn't panic, we evolved. Raquel launched Haven Shield, a client protection team trained to identify economic abuse, coercive debt, and financial grooming. Our AI flagged anomalies. Our counselors followed up, and for the first time, clients had a defense line against the silent violence of manipulated finances. In its first year, Haven Shield prevented over 3,000 potential fraud cases. One survivor emailed us. He thought I couldn't leave because my money was his. Now, thanks to you, I have both. We framed that too. On the day we hit 20 million users, I flew back to the UK. Manchester, the original branch. I stood across the street from it and let the wind sting my eyes. It looked smaller now, but brighter, still alive. Inside, a woman I didn't recognize greeted me. "Can I help you?" I smiled. "No, I'm just visiting family." She paused. "Wait, you're her? Asterisk." I shrugged. "Sometimes." She grinned. "Thank you." And that was all I needed. That winter, a documentary crew followed me for a month. They captured everything. A midnight phone call with a Haven Circle in Afghanistan navigating a food shortage. A keynote in Seoul where I spoke next to a Nobel economist. A private meeting with a 16-year-old girl in the Bronx who ran a microloan group for teen moms. When the documentary aired, it was called Eindest Unlocked, The Story of Haven. It broke viewership records. At the end, it zoomed in on my old photo ID from when I was 17. Captioned, "She only wanted a bank account." Vance. I got a letter from my father after that. Handwritten, long. He spoke about regret, about love misdirected, about the pride he never learned how to show. And at the end, a line. "Your mother wanted you safe. I wanted you small. We both underestimated you." I cried. Then flew home for the holidays. We didn't talk about the letter, but at dinner, my mother handed me a gift. It was a passbook. Vintage. Blue. My name engraved. She said, "It's empty. Thought you could write your own entries." I did. The first one read, "Day 1. Forgave the past. Made space for the future." In year 7, we were nominated again. The Nobel. I told no one. Then forgot about it. Until the day a representative called while I was planting tomatoes in Haven, Chicago's rooftop garden. "You've won." I blinked. "Pardon?" "The Peace Prize. It's yours." I sat down on the soil. The gardener beside me said, "Everything okay?" I smiled, tears blurring my eyes. Yeah, just harvesting something unexpected. The ceremony was televised globally. My speech was 5 minutes long. I ended it with this. They told me no to a bank account. No to dignity, no to a future. But I said yes, and now the world can too. Standing ovation. Afterward, I found Nadia, Raquel, and Margot waiting backstage. They said nothing. They just wrapped me in their arms. And I realized we'd done it. But we weren't done. That night, back at my hotel, I opened my inbox. A new encrypted message. Same sender as Project Ember. But a new line. "Ready to build. In the open, come see what you started." I closed my laptop, looked out at the Oslo sky, and whispered to myself, "One more door, let's open it." The coordinates led me to a village so remote it wasn't on the map. I flew first to Istanbul, then a smaller city deep in the eastern mountains. From there, a 3-hour drive in a 4-wheel drive vehicle, up winding roads that turned to gravel, then to dust. There were no signs, just an occasional painted rock or goat herder's nod. The woman who met me at the final checkpoint wore no uniform, no badge, only a violet scarf and sharp, steady eyes. "Alina," she said simply. "Call me A," I replied. She smiled. "Then I'm E." We exchanged no other names. She led me down a trail to a hidden compound, a modest 2-story clay building, flanked by 4 solar panels and what looked like a makeshift greenhouse. But beneath it all, beneath the compost bins and the piles of donated children's books, was a room lined with corkboard, paper maps, and more than a dozen neatly labeled ledgers. Project Ember wasn't just surviving here. It had become the blueprint. E walked me through what they'd built. Each cluster of women managed their own economy, lending, saving, rotating credit, even collective purchasing agreements with smugglers who brought in essential medicine and sanitation supplies. No one asks for permission anymore, E said. Not to grow food, not to fund a birth, not to fix a roof. They write their names in the ledger, and it's done. I ran my fingers over the pages. Handwriting, fierce and fragile. Receipts in the form of trust. They called it Nouns the Library. The main ledger room, where clusters submitted updates weekly, then rewrote the pages on hidden USBs that could be smuggled to Haven Commons once every quarter. Inside those ledgers were real estate investments, boat repairs, school tuition. In a place with no banks, no legal currency, and no formal grid, they had built a functioning shadow economy. With less than 2,000 printed books and one old laptop. Why now? I asked. E didn't hesitate. Because it's safe enough to tell the world, and because others need to know it's possible. Back in Boston, I gathered the executive team. We launched Orzdimos Haven Invisible, a new division, not publicized, not monetized, quiet infrastructure, covert resource kits, financial blueprints for aid groups, border networks, and informal communities worldwide. We started in 6 locations, then 12, then 20. Within a year, Haven Invisible had connected over 40,000 women through trust-based networks, unregistered co-ops, and micro-enterprises operating entirely on informal ledgers. Our security risk was sky-high, but our impact? Unmatched. And when the backlash came, because it always came, we were ready. A conservative political bloc filed a petition claiming Haven was subverting sovereign monetary systems. They demanded a congressional investigation. They threatened to freeze our funding. But they underestimated something. Our community. In the span of 1 week, over 3 million clients, educators, and partners sent in letters, petitions, video testimonies. One woman in Idaho filmed herself shredding her traditional bank's debit card and said, "If supporting women is illegal, lock me up." Margot ran a 24-hour live stream reading thousands of user letters aloud. Raquel launched a Haven-style mock trial on TikTok, and it trended globally. Even Nadia, usually quiet online, posted a photo of her original staff badge with the caption, "Come for us, we know how to rebuild." The investigation was dropped. Silently. We never celebrated out loud. But we added a new value to our core charter. Time resilience is a system, not a slogan. Meanwhile, our next wild idea was taking root. Timeres Naycase Haven Home. Naycase Haven Home. An affordable housing cooperative model tied directly to Haven savings history, not credit score. Pilot City, Philadelphia. Our architects designed 4-story walk-ups with modular units, built-in childcare, co-working kitchens, and rooftop gardens. We used reclaimed materials and hired from local neighborhoods. Buy-in required community investment, not down payments. It worked. We filled the first building in under 2 months. A woman named Chastity moved in with her teenage son. "First time I've had a key that couldn't be taken away," she said. That key now hangs in the Haven Commons lobby. As our presence grew, so did our threat to legacy institutions. A former banking executive leaked internal documents. Emails, memos. Bank after bank expressing concern over Haven's spread. Too empathetic. Uncomfortably successful. Alina Greaves remains a branding risk. That one made me laugh. I printed it out and taped it to my office whiteboard under a new heading. Sintemnumen, Blagi Snob, Badges of Honor. Then I went to speak at the World Economic Forum. My keynote was titled, "What Happens When Women Write the Rules?" It broke streaming records. That spring, I finally took a 2-week break. Raquel called it financial sabbatical. I left my phone, left my laptop, packed only books, running shoes, and a journal. I went to a small cabin in the Scottish Highlands, walked, slept, breathed, and wrote one line every day. Sums asterisk. What does freedom sound like? Asterisk. By day 14, I had answers. The buzz of a neon sign turning on over a co-op bakery. A woman's laugh after her first balance transfer. A child saying, "Mom owns this place." That journal entry would later become the opening chapter of my book. And then came the letter. It arrived in a weathered envelope with no return address, just a series of numbers. Inside was a photocopy of a ledger page. It was Hannah. The same Hannah from Ember's earliest days. Now signed, Hannah Saidi Mayor, Ember Settlement. With a P.S. We're building a school. Thought you'd want to teach the first class. I booked a ticket the next day. The wind in the Ember Settlement tasted like dust and possibility. It had been nearly 4 years since I first received Hannah's video, the one where she held up her son's medicine and thanked me without using my name. 4 years since a paper ledger changed hands in secret and became the nucleus of a movement. Now I stood on red earth under a yellow sky, watching her walk toward me. She wore no scarf, no veil, her face was sun-hardened, proud. Behind her, the village bustled with new color. Painted shipping containers turned homes, water towers marked with murals, women leading teams of builders, children learning multiplication from blackboards nailed to olive trees. Hannah wrapped me in an embrace that held too many stories for words. "You made it," she said. "I never stopped coming," I whispered back. The school wasn't much to look at yet. 2 conjoined prefab units with a tarp roof, crates stacked into bookshelves, 5 whiteboards with smudged corners. But the chairs were full, and the lesson plan was brilliant. Each girl in the room held a practice ledger, and each ledger told a fictional story of survival. A soap maker, a seamstress, a bicycle courier, a medicine smuggler. The students were tasked with navigating challenges, supply chain breaks, theft, price inflation, while maintaining savings and lending trust scores. Real-life algebra. Real-life stakes. Real-life power. When I stepped up to guest teach, I looked into their faces, brown, bright, alive. "Who here," I asked gently, "has ever been told no?" Every hand went up. "Good," I said, "because no means you're on the verge of something." They leaned forward, wide-eyed. "And here," I continued, "we make no the start of the story, not the end." Quote. That night, I sat with Hannah under a sky scattered in stars. "They've already started designing their own version of Haven," she said. "They call it Shafaq. It means twilight." I nodded. Appropriate, a new beginning. She handed me a page, the curriculum outline. Underneath it, one word scrawled in red ink. "Then I take revision." I blinked. "You named the framework after me?" She shrugged. "Credit where it's due. I didn't do this alone." "No," she said, "but you did it first." When I returned to Boston, the Haven Commons campus greeted me with a banner. Asterisk, asterisk, 10 years, 50 countries, 60 million stories. The anniversary gala was in 2 weeks. But the air in the office was already electric. Nadia had flown in from Paris. Margot had just wrapped up the 3rd edition of her budgeting book, now in 17 languages. Raquel had returned from Argentina, where she'd helped launch Haven circles inside women's prisons. Felix was there too, now head of Haven Digital Strategy, rolling out a neuro-inclusive interface designed for clients with ADHD and dyscalculia. We gathered in the rooftop garden, the same one I'd been standing in when I got the Nobel call, and toasted with iced chai. "No speeches," I warned. But Nadia ignored me. "To Alina," she said, raising her glass, who asked for a bank account and gave us a world. The gala was held in the Manchester Concert Hall, a full-circle moment. The auditorium overflowed. In the first row, my parents. My mother wore the same blue silk blouse she'd once said was too loud. My father kept patting my knee, like he still couldn't believe I was real. On stage, a dozen speakers shared their stories. Lydia, now co-founder of a credit co-op in New Jersey. Salima, graduating top of her class in Nairobi. Raquel's daughter, now 12, explaining the word compound interest to a laughing audience. When it was my turn, I didn't use a teleprompter. I simply stepped to the mic and said, I was told I couldn't be trusted with my own money, that I wasn't ready, that independence was a risk. Now we teach it. We scale it. We live it. To every girl who's been told to wait, to shrink, to be careful, I hope this shows you. You can build the vault and write your own key. That night, after the applause had faded, I walked back to the old Manchester branch. It was closed for the evening, but the lights inside were on. A young teller was sweeping the floor. She saw me through the window, paused, then smiled and gave a small wave. I waved back. She had no idea who I was. And I loved that, because the system was bigger now, stronger, safer. It no longer needed my name. I took one last trip before the year ended. I returned to Ember Settlement. This time, not alone. Raquel, Margot, and Nadia came too. We wore simple clothes, no cameras, no fanfare. The school now had walls, a bell, solar panels, a whiteboard painted with the names of every Haven circle. We taught for a week. Margot explained interest rates using fruit trades. Raquel built mock savings accounts with colored pebbles. Nadia ran a negotiation simulation that ended in the girls forming a fake union and raising prices on her. I taught the final class. Then handed each girl a paper ledger bound in soft leather. You won't need these forever, I told them, but keep them. One day you'll show someone else, and you'll say, this was the beginning. On the flight home, I looked out the window. Then opened my old notebook, the one I'd started in the Scottish Highlands. I added one last line. My Michael Mo's freedom sounds like a door unlocking and staying open. Back at Commons, I took the long route to my office. The walls were filled now. Letters, photos, notes. The final tally? 67 million users. 223 physical branches. 4 Nobel speeches translated into 39 languages. And 1 original passbook. Still empty. Still mine. I opened it. Wrote one final entry. Day 3650. We changed the world. And made sure no one had to beg for a place inside it ever again. Then I closed the book. And walked into a future no one could take from me. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.